Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, Cyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. Today's guest is Phil Venables, CISO of Google Cloud. Though Phil's on the tech side now, he spent upwards of 2 decades in the financial sector, including as CISO of Goldman Sachs. More than just a leading mind in the industry, his writings challenge security leaders to rethink some of their most basic assumptions in the quest to manage risk and protect the global financial system. We're going to talk through some of that, including the hot topic on everyone's mind. Thanks for being here, Phil. Seems like all anyone's talking about is AI, so we might as well start there. Your team just put out a security AI framework. So let's talk about it, the genesis of it, and what you guys hope to achieve with it.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to be here, and I'm glad people noticed the secure AI framework we put out. The backdrop against this is, while there's a lot of new risks and new mitigations and some very specific types of threats and risks associated with AI, the thing that we wanted to really address was, for many organizations, including our own, a lot of the controls around AI are founded on a basic set of control principles that are applicable to other forms of software development, model development, data management, and data governance. And while there's a lot of new and interesting things in the framework associated with AI, it's something that we think is also represents a kind of foundational framework for how people can build and develop on those controls. So, for example, there's 6 things in the framework. I won't spend a lot of time going through each one because we could probably do a whole episode just on AI. But really, it's about making sure that you've got that strong security foundation to manage the training data, manage the weights, manage the model deployment. It's very, very similar to an end-to-end data governance approach and an end-to-end software development approach. It's also important, and we cover this in the framework, to think about how you extend your detection and response capability to bring AI systems into that fold, so that you're managing and monitoring how people are using or abusing your AI systems and making sure that you're factoring that in. And then also using AI to help with your defenses. A big part of deploying, particularly large language models, is having output and input filters that themselves are actually typically large language models to help filter and manage the use of the system. So AI can be one of the best defenses for AI. And then overall, it's about how do you embed controls into your platforms and into your tooling so that not everybody has to be an AI expert, that they inherit controls. And again, everybody that's listening today will know that that's the way we do security. You embed things in the tooling to make the secure path the easiest path, and it's the same with AI. And then finally, you have to think about the end-to-end business risks, and this is not just security. It's, as everybody is familiar with, it's compliance, it's model risk, it's legal risk, it's reputational risk, it's a whole array of other things around trust and safety. So the framework really gives people a starting point for how to build on all of those different controls for all of the new AI technologies.
So are you hoping that this becomes like an industry standard framework, or what are you hoping people do with it?
Well, we're certainly, looking to partner with organizations to develop the framework. I don't think we expect it to be the framework because there's other frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. There's an emerging set of ISO standards in the 42000 series, and there's going to be other regulatory and sector-specific frameworks. But I think what we're hoping to do with it, in partnering with other organizations, hopefully including some financial services organizations, is to build on this framework to attach other more detailed recommendations and tooling to it. And so we think it should have a broader use beyond Google and beyond customers' use of the Google AI platform. So we're definitely open to partnerships and development, and we've got a lot of that in the works at the moment as well.
You mentioned using a large language model to protect against large language models. So let's talk a little bit about the opportunities for AI and cybersecurity. What do you see as the big key use cases now that we can start, implementing right away?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to bucket this in 3 areas for how to think about AI and cyber. It's really around threats, toil, and talent. And so on the threats, we are already using existing AI, but now also large language models and other generative AI to help us analyze and monitor and manage threats. This could be things like analyzing new malware discovered through our virus total service, and then using our SecPalm-2 large language model to decode that and provide threat advice. So we think large language models, especially those like ours, trained on a big corpus of security and threat data, can really help manage and help people analyze threat intelligence. The second piece is on Toil. We all know that a lot of security jobs, especially the security operational jobs, have got quite a lot of overhead. The tools don't necessarily work in all the way that they should, and so we're heavily focused on applying, again, our SecPalm-2 large language model across how do we help organizations automate a lot of their security operations. We're embedding things into our Chronicle analytics solution, our security operations suite, even going all the way to embed it in how we can identify and uncover software vulnerabilities in an array of software, as well as also looking at how you identify potential cloud configuration issues and help organizations generate secure cloud configuration in automated ways through our Duet system that generates that. And then finally, on the talent front, we think, again, AI ultimately is going to be this great democratizer of talent. So taking people with, as they're developing their skills, giving them AI assistance that can expand and extend their skills is going to be a great thing for expanding the talent pool. And overall, I think, applying this to security operations, fraud management and response, anomaly detection, controls monitoring, configuration checking, and software security assurance are just some of the initial fields that we see others applying this to. But as you can imagine, anywhere
So basically
where there's human activity is kind of everything. Exactly. Yeah.
And what about the risks? I mean, everybody's kind of panicking. It feels like everybody's sort of panicking, and people are, saying, okay, we're just going to ban it, which I don't think is, a long-term solution. But what are the risks that you see, especially for financial services organizations, and how do we deal with them?
Well, I think, we're seeing threat actors start to use this technology, and they've been using it for quite a while. But of course, the wider availability of this is, again, as we talk about, democratizing good talent to extend people's skills and capabilities. All of this technology is inherently dual use, so it also extends the capabilities of threat actors as well. And we see that already, whether it's in terms of, so-called deep fakes across voice, video, and images being used for misinformation and disinformation campaigns, also being used to confound authentication systems that rely on authenticating people's voice or image, or even some of their kind of video interaction. We start to see some manipulation of that. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations already adapt to that by strengthening traditional authentication techniques, in some cases deploying AI to detect those deep fakes. But I think in our experience, at least so far, a lot of that, plus even some of the use of AI to enhance attackers' social engineering and phishing capabilities, are all things that can be solved for with stronger forms of current authentication. And I think many of these things should drive the industry even harder to strong phishing resistant authentication, like hardware tokens, or some of the things that we and some other tech companies have released recently called passkeys, which is a FIDO aligned standard for how to get phishing resistant authentication on people's personal devices. And I think a lot of that, the more we're going to rely on stronger authentication, is going to be a way that we're going to bolster defenses against attacker use of AI. And then we're seeing early signs of them using it to generate new types of attacks and malware. But I think, I think that again is something that we will seek to counter with enhancing the current defenses rather than doing anything new and special. But as we just talked about, using AI to counter AI is always going to be an option as well.
How does this sort of rapid onslaught of AI relate to firms' migration to the cloud and their, general strategies around securing their cloud environments?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at that. In many respects, the AI is driving an acceleration of cloud adoption, because typically the scale of the models and the infrastructure and the surrounding services that you need to do this effectively are typically mostly available in a cloud environment. it's not beyond the reach of some companies to be able to build out enough infrastructure, gather enough data, have enough skills and capability to do this. But for, I think, the vast majority of even the largest organizations, they're going to have to come to cloud to get access to the processing capability, the models, and the expertise to be able to deploy certainly the new large language models. And that's, again, one of the things that we're supporting a lot of organizations in. I think as well, where it's going to be helpful in the cloud is helping people do configuration checks and using AI to generate cloud configurations in a secure way, just like people are exploring the use of it to generate software and generate other types of analytics. So again, I think we're going to see a drive to the cloud to get access to AI, but also the use of the AI tools to help people securely manage their cloud configurations. And we're already pushing out a bunch of solutions. We have a thing called Duet, again, based on our SecPalm2 model that helps people define and configure and push out secured cloud configurations in a way that's a lot easier than I think they're currently finding it for many clients.
Is Duet the technology that duplicates what's on a mainframe or some kind of core banking system in the cloud?
It's a range of things. So we describe Duet as a set of tooling that augments people's capability, whether it's for generating software, for generating cloud configurations, for generating security operations analytics, and it's all based on our our Palm2 models that are often enhanced with domain-specific knowledge. But certainly, as we go forward, anything where there's a migration challenge from one configuration to another configuration that requires a lot of human effort, and it represents a set of knowledge that we have built up over many years that we can then encode as an enhancement to those models. It's certainly something, pretty much anything that can be automated is going to find some automation through a large language model.
So let's talk about the fact that Google Cloud recently joined FS-ISAC's Critical Providers Program. Tell me a little bit about, why did joining it make sense for you guys, and what are the initiatives that you're undertaking to kick off this relationship?
Yeah, so I mean, we recognize that as a cloud provider, we're part of a vital level of support for many critical infrastructures, and clearly financial services is one of the most critical infrastructures in the nation, and the world in general. And so recognizing that more and more banks are running their critical business systems on our platform, it just makes sense to keep having a closer relationship, not just with those individual banks, but with the community overall. And also, we want to make sure that we're meeting customers where they are rather than always expecting customers to come to us. And we constantly want to make sure the platform is getting more secure, more reliable, more resilient, and also more amenable to demonstrating compliance in the context of financial services regulations. And for us to be in an organization that is about promulgating best practices, identifying threats, sharing information about vulnerabilities, working as part of the community to improve the situation, it just makes sense for us to be with our customers in their environment as opposed to expecting our customers to come to us one-on-one with all these things. And that's why, as you've seen, some of the initial engagements have been around threat sharing, opening up our vast collection of threat intelligence data that we have, not just from Google, but from Mandiant, that's now part of Google Cloud, to give an aperture into that, because I think we've got a lot to not only share, but we've also got a lot to learn that can focus that intelligence machinery to support the needs of the financial sector. And while we're very, very focused on finance, it's not a unique strategy to finance. We've also been joining other ISACs, for example, the healthcare ISAC and the multi-state ISAC, and we're working on other ISACs, again, for exactly the same logic. And, we would hope ultimately that we can help all critical infrastructure sectors in a shared defensive mission. And I think, it's important for us to bring our capabilities and skills to that. So, we're very, very happy and proud. And certainly for me, having spent a long time in financial services, it's nice to be sort of home a little bit. While I spend most of my time in tech, I do still love financial services.
Well, we're glad you're still with us. So, we started the program in the first place to focus on, the supply chain risk of the sector. And you guys have also made some recommendations around that. And, obviously, especially right now, it's a key issue. So how do you think we think as a sector about securing the software supply chain and even beyond software infrastructure as well? And then also what kind of approaches should, at a firm level, what should firms be doing to think about how do they mitigate this very, very, present risk?
Yeah, well, as you said, we've done a lot in software supply chain risk based on what we do internally, and so we helped define a thing called SALSA, SLSA.dev, which is supply chain levels for software artifacts, and it's a necessary addition to what everybody's currently doing with SBOMs, the software bills of material, because we think it's important to not only understand what's in software to manage your supply chain risk, you've also got to understand how that software was actually built and protected and assured. And so you need both SBOMs and SALSA together, and we've open sourced that framework. It's under community control. And in fact, the financial services open source organization FinOS has been looking at how that plays into some of the financial services projects as well. And so we would encourage all organizations to not just approach their supply chain risk in the normal third-party assessment way, but also to think about how you instrument your supply chain to get actual data about the risks in the supply chain. The good news about software is it's more complex, but it also is more amenable to that type of instrumentation. So organizations over time should be able to consume SBOMs and consume SALSA maturity scores to be able to systematically form a view of their software supply chain risk. And we're very, very committed to put all of that in our tooling environment. And in fact, many of our products, and I'm not sure about the other cloud providers, but I think they're going in the same direction, is if you build software on the platform, you're going to get an inherently high level of control, both in terms of being able to ship software, ship services with an SBOM, but also with a high degree of SALSA maturity, which encodes a lot of different security requirements on the software supply chain.
You did a set of posts on the fundamental forces of information security risk that I found pretty interesting. Do you want to talk through those or give your thoughts on any kind of key ones that people and CISOs especially should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, so I'd kind of written this a while ago and kind of refreshed it recently, and it's interesting as we build our services worldwide, as we work for customers. It seemed to us that when you look behind all of the risks and controls and threats and issues, everything just comes down to a small number of these kind of fundamental forces. And so, for example, one that we talk about a lot is information wants to be free, which is information in its natural state always tries to flow everywhere. So you've got to put data governance, data controls, guards around that, and have constant processes to manage that. But at the same time, recognize, as everybody knows, that information is the lifeblood of their businesses. And so you can't just lock it up in silos. You've got to manage where it should go to permit business mission and customer value within the constraints of the security, compliance, and other obligations. And I think this is why we see data governance, data security, and all of these other disciplines coming together more and more, because you're all about managing the integrity, the privacy, the compliance of how you use data, while at the same time maximizing an organization's value from that. The other one is that everybody's familiar with is the old adage of information wants to be free, but also code wants to be wrong. And so all code has bugs and errors, and many of those can be security vulnerabilities. And so it's important to have that software lifecycle around having high assurance of security. And then, the final one I mentioned, because we could go on at length about this, is the other one that is the phrase we use is entropy is king, which is if you do nothing, things are just going to degrade to an uncontrolled state. So it points to what I know a lot of organizations have been implementing around continuous control monitoring. So the fact that you can't just implement a control and walk away, because at some point that's going to break. You've got to implement controls and implement a process to continuously monitor and validate that those controls remain effective. And again, that's not just something you should do like every year in an audit or every 6 months in some risk and control self-assessment. It's got to be instrumented real time. And I'm going to try not to plug cloud too much, but I can't help but say the great thing about cloud, with it being a software defined infrastructure, is you inherently can manage and monitor and constantly check that the controls you expect are the controls you've got deployed, and which is why we see a lot of organizations getting more security advantage and ease of doing that after they've either transitioned to the cloud or modernized to an on-premise cloud-like environment.
Hmm. What I liked about the principles, especially as a non-security person myself, is that it takes what seems to be something that's extremely complicated and complex and boils it down to something that feels, I don't want to say simple, but simple from a conceptual perspective. But I would imagine that CISOs on a day-to-day basis are confronted with the complexity of whatever their security programs are. So how do they go from dealing with everything that's sort of like the symptoms of all of these principles and kind of back up so that they can organize it in a way that actually controls, right, and actually manages these forces? You know what I mean?
No, absolutely, and we deal with that challenge ourselves, and we certainly witness that in many customers, and I think what a lot of organizations are doing now, because they recognize that many of their security issues are just symptoms of bigger issues. I think the CISOs in general are taking more of an executive leadership role to not just deal with security challenges, but to take a step back and think about what does it mean to position their organizations to be better able to manage and mitigate all of the symptoms of these fundamental forces. So for example, you see a lot of CISOs and this is familiar to financial services organizations, but you see them doing this in many organizations now, is the CISO taking a lead on how an organization manages its data overall in partnership with the chief data officer or in partnership with other parts of the organization, to take a step back and say, what's the strategy for managing data? How do we track data integrity, data lineage, the data security? How do we track its use in different business applications? And again, back to the AI point, how do we track what data should feed which AI models for what purposes, under what control? And I think CISOs are recognizing that to take and drive what they need to do for security risk, they're having to solve bigger problems, and that's a great platform for the CISO as a first class executive within the business. The other one that we see a lot is, again, leading edge CISOs partnering with business executives and CIOs to modernize their technology platforms. As I think everybody listening today is probably very familiar with the notion that most of the issues we have, especially in traditional on-premise environments, is where security's had to be bolted on after the fact. And we all know that the best way to do security is to have a more modern technology architecture where the architecture is more self-defending, where security is built in, not bolted on. And again, cloud is a natural place for that, but certainly people can modernize on-premise with cloud-like technology. And what you find is when you deliver that, you deliver better software delivery agility, better reliability, better efficiency, and you get better security. And so we see in a lot of organizations the CISO partnering with the CIO or the CTO to do technology transformation, not just security transformation, because they recognize the fundamental forces at play. You can only solve them with that collective effort. You can't solve them by bolting on security after the fact.
Yeah, that actually leads into my next question, which is about this working group that you're on for the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. It's on cyber physical resilience. And I thought when I was reading about it, there was this question about the tensions between fixing components versus investing in system-wide resilience, right? Which sometimes, I think it's kind of exactly to the point that you were just making, can be at odds in the short term, where there's been bolted on these security fixes and technologies and programs to try to address a particular need, but then it becomes a kind of unwieldy giant thing that isn't resilient to any, a kind of shock, or at least has a weak link. So, what kinds of thinking are you doing on that council? And, what kinds of approaches do you think that we need to reconcile this and create the ground for building, not just cyber resilience, but, business resilience at a more fundamental level?
Well, the things we're going through, and in the next few months, we'll start publishing more output from that, and we're certainly optimistic that the work that we're doing is going to have some positive effect. I think when we strip away all of the details, the things that we're intently focused on is this notion of how do we get better resilience in our critical infrastructures, such that end-to-end critical functions or business services or public services are capable of operating even in the presence of attacks or reliability issues. And this is this whole notion. And again, the financial sector has been leading the way on this with the whole operational resilience concept, which is to think you don't just defend a system and assume it will always be defended and never fail. You've got a plan for operating in a degraded state when it does fail. And I think one of the things we're going to keep driving as part of this work is to encourage all critical infrastructures to plan for outages and still be able to operate. A good example earlier in the year, and there's plenty of financial services examples, but I'll give everybody a break and pick a different industry. So, for example, earlier in the year, the FAA, there was a U.S. Federal Aviation Administration system had an outage. It was a just a regular outage rather than a cyber attack. But the net result of this was that all of all of North American airspace, all planes were grounded for a few hours because this one system that coordinated flight operations was down. The result of that was everybody started focusing in on how do we make sure this system never goes down again, as opposed to what we actually should be also focusing on, which is to say, why is there this weird dependency on this one system? And one of the things we're starting to do in looking at this resilience is to say, if we've got any system in any organization who, if it fails for a cyber reason or a regular outage or any other reason, if the blast radius of that failure is the entire sector, then we should start doing some changes. We should also make sure that system is well defended, but the fact that it exists as such a critical dependency is just as much of an issue as to whether it's protected or not. And another part of what we're focused on is what we're calling cold start recovery time, which is how feasible is it to not just think of recovery time objectives for resiliency events in the conventional sense, but how could you actually just restart an entire business function from almost nothing and just build it back up? Do people know how to do that in all cases? So again, we're pursuing this kind of line of reasoning that says for us to be more resilient, we've got to prepare to operate under attack in degraded states, as well as all of the efforts we're currently doing focused on defense to make sure nothing breaks.
Yeah. Just thinking about the cold start, when you think about that, it's like, I can't imagine that most people do know how to.
Well, the challenge I always
something from scratch.
No, that's like right. That. The challenge I always give to people is, I've written about this in some blogs, to thinking about what's the time to reboot your company. So imagine if everything was wiped and all you have is a bunch of bare metal or empty cloud instances, and then you have a bunch of immutable backups, tapes, or whatever. How quickly can you reboot your company from those backup tapes and that bare metal? And that's a very different thing than restoring a backup for a failed server, or even restoring a backup for a failed data center. When you think about the concept of rebooting your company, a lot of organizations I think struggle with that. And I know I've worked in organizations in my current organization where we do a lot of work to constantly prove we can kind of rehydrate things if there was ever an unexpected failure. So I think a lot of organizations are going to have to do that, and it's definitely a more rigorous approach than conventional disaster recovery, backup and recovery testing to think about how can I reboot my company from nothing is I think what we're going to have to think of in the future.
It did bring to mind, I can't help but say, I did bring to mind Sheltered Harbor.
Well,
um,
yeah, I'm somewhat, have some history there that colors my judgment on everything.
well, I mean, might as well just, take the opportunity since we're here. Um, I know you were one of the founders of Sheltered Harbor in the early days, and I also worked on it. And when I think about it, and I think about now how they've actually taken the standard and tried to say, okay, now you can use it for any kind of data, not just the first, critical account data that they were originally that it was originally built for. It feels like that could be at least some. I don't know that means that it's not going to recreate your system, but it could be a place to store like the blueprints for how you would
Right.
recreate a system,
No,
right?
no. I think that's right. And this is when we think about operating in degraded states, and which is why I think the financial sector is that concept of operational resilience is broadly correct. The notion that you don't have to be perfectly recoverable as long as you are capable of running some critical aspects of your services to keep going while you in parallel do the longer recovery. And I think that take on how to think about resilience gives organizations a lot of flexibility to deal with more extreme, as the language of operational resilience describes it, more plausible but severe scenarios, as opposed to the traditional method, resilience methodology of everything is about bringing things back to what they were immediately and as quickly as possible, as opposed to thinking about operating in a degraded state while you're bringing things back. And I think Sheltered Harbor as a data store of last resort, if you needed to recover and keep things going, is an important concept.
So I'll move now to some kind of a different topic that I saw. You did a post on work-life balance that I thought was really interesting, and certainly something that I can relate to as well, as I'm sure you and many people who are listening to this can. So want to talk about a couple of highlights or some kind of realizations that you've come to over the years on how to achieve work-life balance, or how to even think about what work-life balance means?
Yeah, I mean, really kind of two big lessons learned that I'm sure many people have figured out as painfully as I have, that work-life balance is not about work-life balance every day. So, for example, today, my work-life balance is absolutely terrible today because I'm doing a very, very long day. But I'm going to reward myself by having a little bit of a shorter day tomorrow. And when I think about work-life balance, I tend to view things in like a monthly time frame. Some people may view it every week. Some people may even just think of it on a yearly basis. I tend to think, do I have the right balance every month? Because in all of our roles, especially the security role, you may have to do 5 days of crazy amount of work. The point being that if you're going to do 30 days or longer of crazy amount of work, then that's a signal that the balance is wrong. And so I think sometimes people obsess too much about getting their daily balance right, and which is inevitably hard to do. And when they can't do that, causes more stress, which continues to feed on poor work-life balance. And so I tend to think of it work-life balance being over longer periods of time. The other thing that I think a lot of people forget, and I had to work pretty hard to do this for myself, is that there's a lot of discipline required to maintain work-life balance. And there's an old phrase, I can't remember where I got this from, but I didn't invent this phrase, but it's a really good phrase that describes it. It basically says, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. So we all know every day when I like to think of this as talk to your future self. So that meeting request you got today that says, hey, can we just meet to talk about this kind of random subject that you don't really know what it's all about and it's of questionable value, and you just think, I'll just say yes. And then that meeting turns up in a month and you think, why on earth did I agree to this meeting? And so I always find it useful when you're trying to be disciplined about how you manage your time, to talk to your future self and imagine your future self judging the decision you're about to make and whether your future self in 1 month is going to be pleased with that decision. And 9 times out of 10, your future self is not going to be happy with the decision you just made. And sometimes it's harder to say no to some things. But once you have the discipline of making those current hard choices, life becomes a lot easier. And again, I know that people at different levels in their career and different degrees of role power have different agency over how they manage their time. But I think at all levels, in all contexts, I think spending a bit more discipline and doing the hard choices now to keep your future self happier and with better balance usually pays off.
It's like nobody ever is on their deathbed saying, I wish I went to that meeting, or I wish I worked. I wish I worked a lot harder than I did.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, one of the, in the response to that blog post, somebody sent me this note that basically said the only people in 20 years that will remember you work late are your kids and family. So,
Exactly.
which brings it home even more.
Exactly. Well, speaking of, I'm about at the end of my workday, so I'm going to go be with my kids and family. Do you have any other, last thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, just leave everybody with, again, I think, I know from personal experience how hard the security job is. I spend a lot of time interacting with non-security people in our customers, in our government, in our regulators. And the degree of appreciation from everybody about what everybody does in these security roles continues to grow. I think all of our security roles, as I like to think about, is defending the ideas and capital that are essential for human progress. And it's one of the few jobs where you can genuinely say, in many respects, you're defending lives and livelihoods. So I think we should be all proud of what we do. And it's a hard job, but it's a worthwhile job. And working together as a team, I think we're all going to ultimately keep on the right side of defending everything.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks again to Phil for being our guest on this episode, and we're excited to work with Google Cloud as we strive together to remain both thoughtful and nimble in this time of constant change for the sector. If you like this podcast and want to hear from more FinCyber leaders around the world, subscribe to FinCyber Today on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. You can also find them, as well as articles by other thought leaders, at FS-ISAC.com/insights, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something.